Welcome. What you are about to hear is a true story that sounds like a mystery. Listen carefully, and I'll ask you to post your guesses to what happened in the chat box. A little girl named Jennifer grew up in Cleveland in the 1970s. When she was 12 years old, her family moved out of the city, which meant Jennifer had to change schools. Like most 12-year-olds, she was anxious about making a good impression on her new schoolmates and hoped to make friends quickly. Luckily, Jennifer's new classmates went out of their way to welcome her. Sarah helped her stay on track with the lesson plan in English class. Caitlin invited Jennifer to sit with her at lunch, and Debbie made friends with Jennifer in gym class. Despite her new classmates' best efforts, Jennifer struggled with who was who. She'd pass classmates in the hall without speaking. She'd call students by the wrong name. She couldn't remember the names of the people that she'd had conversations with just the day before. We've all been the new kid at one time or another. It's not easy to match faces with names while taking in the newness of it all, but for most of us, we start to add people to our memory bank within a few days or a few weeks at most. But not so for Jennifer. Her inability to remember who was who lasted for an entire school year. But why? Why do you think that Jennifer had so much trouble remembering the names of her new school friends? Please post your guesses in the chat box now. Learning disability is one guess from Dale Gonzo. Who else? Because she thought they all looked alike from Lisa Neal. Language barrier from Jeannie. Any other guesses? And almost an entire school year. Okay, let's find out the answer. For the first 12 years of her life, Jennifer had learned to distinguish the facial details of only one race. You see, Jennifer was a black girl who had moved to an all-white school. Black faces were all that she'd been routinely exposed to in the 12 years before she moved to the suburbs. She had never immersed herself in a white community. She'd had no practice recognizing facial features of white people. Decades later, Jennifer would dedicate herself to addressing the fundamental question that underscored her adolescent experience. And today, she's a professor and researcher at Stanford University. Her book, Biased: Uncovering the Hidden Prejudice That Shapes What We See, Think, and Do, addresses both the neuroscience and social impact of bias. What she discovered was that by the time babies are 3 months old, their brains react more strongly to faces of their own race than to faces of people not of their race. That race-selective response grows stronger as children move into adolescence, driven in part by the circumstances of their lives. In short, Jennifer had learned what's important, the faces she saw every day, and over time, her brain built a preference for those faces. It was simply her brain's way of helping her to be more efficient. And so, whether you've heard it said by others or you've thought it yourself, that cringe-worthy expression, "they all look alike," it's not a response that is limited to the domain of a bigot. It's actually a function of biology and exposure. Our brains are better at processing faces that evoke a sense of familiarity. We reserve our precious cognitive resources for people who are like us. Otherwise, we see categories. So, categorization is simply a function of the brain that allows us to organize and manage the overload of stimuli. It helps us quickly sort safety from danger by grouping things that are alike together. It's a perfectly normal function of the human brain. Categorization is about what we see or don't see about a group of people. Or stereotype is what we believe or don't believe about others. The word actually comes from an old typesetting process in which the message is cast on a metal plate and replicated in the printing process again and again and again. Walter Lippmann, who was an influential newspaper journalist of the early 20th century, wrote that we tend to perceive that which we have picked out in the form stereotyped for us by our culture. Stereotype, then, is an exaggerated belief or distorted truth about a person or a group, a generalization that allows for little or no individual differences or social variation. Stereotypes can be positive, such as Asians are good at math, or negative, unless they're an Asian, women are bad at math. And that brings us to the word bias. If you believe that Asian men and women are good at math or that non-Asian women are bad at math, that's a stereotype. But if you hire an Asian for a job that also has an equally qualified non-Asian female applicant because you believe that she is not as good at math, your bias can begin to have a negative impact. Research has demonstrated that biases thought to be absent or distinguished remain as mental residue in most of us. Studies show that people can be consciously committed to egalitarianism and deliberately work to behave without prejudice, yet still possess hidden prejudices or stereotypes. The truth is, the only perception we have is our own. We cannot correctly assess reality unless we intentionally gather input from others who help us challenge our perceptions and get a clearer understanding of the whole picture. And studies have shown that the need to gather input from a diverse group of people have bottom line impact. In a 2018 MIT Sloan study, 2 groups of people were asked to solve a similar problem. The first was a homogeneous group of people who shared similar traits such as age, race, and socioeconomic backgrounds. The second group was made up of diverse members. They were gender inclusive, mixed race, age, and experience levels. A few interesting results emerged. First, after both groups deliberated and returned in their results, the group made up of the homogeneous people were 30% less accurate on average than the diverse groups. What's even more interesting, when the 2 groups were asked how they thought they had performed on a scale of 1 to 10, the homogeneous group scored themselves at a little over 6.3, while the diverse group gave themselves just under 5.9 on average. What's more, when each group was asked how confident they were in their decision, again, the homogeneous group showed more confidence. Why? For the homogeneous group, mistakes were, in a sense, more contagious. That is, not only were people in the homogeneous group more likely to make errors in judgment, but other people in that group were more likely to copy those errors. They were less likely to raise questions and challenge assumptions. They thought that others in the group knew more than they did, so they just didn't speak up. In the diverse group, however, people were less likely to trust the wisdom of other people's choices. The diverse group was far more rigorous in how they approached their decisions and spent a longer time deliberating. They considered a wider range of perspectives, and they made fewer factually inaccurate statements. In this group, the cognitive dissonance, or having to consider perceptions that differ from one's own, led to a lack of confidence. Yet, the diverse group clearly outperformed the homogeneous group. The practical implications of studies such as this one from MIT Sloan can have a direct impact on performance and bottom line results. I'd like to conclude by conducting a brief experiment using a video. When the video begins, you will be asked to count the number of times the players wearing white pass the basketball. So if the players bounce the ball to another player, that doesn't count. Ready? Let's begin.
This is a test of selective attention. How many times the players wearing white pass the basketball? How many passes did you count?
Please answer the poll on your screen. All right. Looks like we have enough answers. 10 is the most. Let's see.
The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla?
Interesting, huh? So most of you saw 10 passes. Some of you got the answer, maybe 15 correct, but many of you might have missed the gorilla entirely. Let's see how many of you saw the gorilla by putting your comments in the chat box now. Interesting. That's interesting. It's really a mixed bag, isn't it? And some of you may have seen this before too, so that might have reflected. All right. So the point here is that when you focus on getting the question right, but you miss the gorilla in the room, if I were part of this group, I would rather miss the question by a point or two and pick up on something that could have been even more important, the gorilla in the room. No? Let's stop believing that our differences make us superior or inferior to one another. Diverse teams generate a better strategy, better risk management, better debates, and better outcomes. I heard someone say it like this the other day. If you were in an escape room, who would you want to have in that room with you? A group of people who thought exactly like you, or people who are divergent in their thinking? Hi, can you see me okay? I'm up here on my screen. I'm up in the top. This is Sherry Nassim, and I am the CEO of Center for Executive Excellence. We are a global executive coaching and consultancy organization based in San Diego, California, and we are thrilled that you are joining us today for this fascinating panel discussion on the bottom line of bias in the workplace. You're here with several other participants, about 50 other people, and I want to encourage you to feel free to connect with each other in the chat room, share your LinkedIn profiles, make comments, drop questions, broaden your community. Let everyone know where you're from, why you tuned in today, build that community. Go ahead and start doing that while I introduce our distinguished panel. I'll be bringing them on one at a time, starting with our moderator, Arthur Benjamin. There he is. Hi, Arthur. Arthur Benjamin is the Global Director of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging for Varian Medical Systems. It's a cancer care provider headquartered in Palo Alto, California. It employs a team of more than 10,000 employees across more than 34 countries. Hello, my friend. Next, we have Pamela Gabriel. Pamela serves as the Senior Vice President and Market Manager for Bank of America's local market team in San Diego. She is dedicated to delivering the bank's environmental, social, and governance responsibilities to local communities. Welcome, Pamela. And next, we have Rudy Johnson. Rudy is the President and CEO of Neighborhood House Association. This organization was established in 1914 as a settlement house that assisted immigrants transitioning into the San Diego community. Over 100 years later, the agency has become one of the largest nonprofits in San Diego County and has distinguished itself as a cutting-edge human resources provider. Hello, Rudy. MyMy Lu serves as a diversity and inclusion manager at Sempra Energy, an energy infrastructure company focused on connecting millions through the power of people, ideas, and innovation. MyMy drives the company's diversity and inclusion strategy, impacting over 18,000 employees throughout North America. Welcome, MyMy. And finally, I'm thrilled to introduce you to Glenn Williams, director at Qualcomm, the world's leading wireless technology innovator with over 37,000 employees in more than 30 countries around the globe. Glenn is responsible for defining and implementing best practices that embed diversity and inclusion into the organization's culture. Hello again, Glenn.
We've got Mitch on the line too, Sherry.
Oh, thank you, Mitch. I beg your pardon. I scrolled right past you. Mitch Mitchell, drum roll please, is the Vice President, External and Legislative Affairs for SDGE and Southern California Gas. Prior to joining SoCalGas in 2005, Mitch served as Vice President of Public Policy and Communications at the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce, where he worked with the Chamber's members and diverse volunteer base to develop a public policy agenda that is favorable to business climate and standard of living in San Diego. Good afternoon, Mitch, and my apologies for missing you.
No problem. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. Well, again, welcome all of you. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I am going to turn it right over to you, and I really look forward to learning from you as thought leaders and practitioners. I will pop back in at around 4:30 Pacific to relay question and answers by the audience, and I'll invite each questioner to unmute themselves and ask their questions live. So then we'll do a quick wrap up and make sure that we end the webinar promptly at 5 o'clock. Fair enough?
Sounds good.
All right, I'll leave it in your good hands, Arthur. See you on the other side.
Thank you, Sherry. First of all, I am really excited about moderating this conversation with some of San Diego's best professionals. And so welcome panelists for this opportunity to engage and have great dialogue and meaningful conversation around the area of bias in the workplace. I know this is something that is at the forefront of conversations in boardrooms and in executive meetings. And so without any hesitation, we're going to jump right into our questions. Again, welcome to everyone. My first question for the panel is, what are some key things leaders can do to navigate and manage their own biases and its impact on their team and organization? I think with that question, I'll start with Pamela and then I'll go to Rudy.
Thanks, Arthur. First and foremost, I'm really, really excited to be here and definitely honored to be invited to be a part of this panel, so thank you. For me, personally, I think, of course, it's important to understand what a bias is, but I think our understanding of what biases are doesn't stop there. Once you understand what a bias is, I think it's important as leaders for us to really look at our own personal biases, because once we can identify those biases within ourselves, we're able to actually identify how we actively put those biases into the workplace. So once we do that for ourselves, I think it's then important to set that stage with your team to have open dialogue and conversation about how we can improve to not have these types of biases going forward. Above and beyond for myself, I think it's an ongoing process where you really have to continue to look at this, because as a human being, I think we've all grown up with our own personal biases and our own culture and our experiences. And so it's an ongoing process, I would say, for leaders.
I definitely appreciate that, Pamela. Thank you so much for sharing. Rudy, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, first of all, Arthur, let me just say thank you for having myself and the Neighborhood House Association's perspective today, and to my colleagues on the panel. It's just been a joy and a pleasure working up to this moment. As a leader, we all have our individual journeys that we kind of come from to get to wherever we are in the universe. And so With that comes individual biases that you bring to that table, to that seat, to that place that you are as a professional. So the very first thing that I would recommend as leaders is that we build a well-balanced team of support that comes from a different place than you did, right? Another perspective, if you will, another journey on this path of life, so that as you sit and make decisions, you get a diverse perspective of true real life experience, so that I think you can arrive at the best judgment calls that you can for an organization. That's point one. Point two would be that you go out and you recruit potential leaders for your organization from unusual places that you wouldn't ordinarily go to, right? If San Diego State or UCSD or US, those are all great institutions, but if you continue to recruit from those same old institutions and you don't look at historical Black colleges and universities, et cetera, then you're going to get that same type of individual that comes out of those learning institutions, and therefore your decisions are going to be monolithic in nature. And so I'm big on diversifying your talent pool, bringing different life perspectives to the table, and I think you're better off in your decision making. Likewise, you'll be better off as an organization.
Wow, Rudy, that was a mouthful. That the importance of diversifying the talent pool and surrounding yourself with diversity of thought is a huge component of this. I'm going to open it up to the other panelists. I want to read the question again to make sure that everyone understands, and then any other ones that want to chime in. The question again is, what are some key things leaders can do to navigate and manage their own biases and its impact on their team and the organization? Does any of our other panelists want to chime in and share?
Yeah, I'll add a couple of things on. I agree with what Rudy said. I think one of the things that I find interesting in life, especially in the corporate community, is, for leaders, is that you're asked to lead a team of people, and we have a segment of life that exists all over, and you hang out with the same people who are like you, and so when you're a leader, this in itself puts you in an interesting position, because if you are not actually trying to learn more about the people that are working for you, that are on your team, that are your colleagues, that are different than you, both in ethnicity, both in religion, then you're going to continue to have these what we call unconscious bias components, because you don't know what you don't know. And I think that probably is the one thing that the corporate community is going to have to work better on, is when you put people as leaders over teams, you have to ask them, how deep is their understanding of others? And what I mean by that is that again, if you make $70,000 a year and you only hang out with people who make $70,000 a year. Same with socioeconomic. If you only hang out with one ethnicity, if you only hang out with people who drive the same kind of car, you're limited in your understanding, right? And so I think sometimes the biggest problem that I find in the corporate community is we ask people to be leaders, and they don't know how to lead people that they don't understand, or they don't have any experience with regard to dialogue. And so that leads to missteps. And, the best thing organizations can do is truly break down that integration backlog and that barrier by forcing people to have conversations and understanding others that they're working with, working around, expected to be successful with each and every day. And that's, I'm constantly baffled by this. And I'll close with this. If you poll most leaders and say, hey, listen, because of this topic here, how diverse is your network? And what I mean by that, diversity of opinion, ethnicity, gender, how diverse is your actual network, the people that you regularly learn from and communicate with? You'll be surprised at the number of people who say, well, it's a good network. I like them, but how diverse is it in terms of all those things? Not very. It's unfortunate. That is the world we live in.
That's incredible insight, Mitch. The idea of diversifying your network, diversifying your team, diversifying who you hang out with, who you choose to spend time with, as opportunities to better understand. We call it in a D&I space cultural competence, so that you better understand people and who they are, so that you work better together. Exactly. Incredible insight. Anyone else? Any other panelists want to share or chime in on that question?
Hey, all right, it's Mimi here. I'll add thank you as well for having both Sempra Energy and SDGE on. So I'm so excited to be on this with Mitch. And I just want to add to everything that's shared. Modeling this behavior is really important. I can tell you, Mitch is one of our executives who we've had a number of conversations, as you can imagine. I know we'll get into all of that, but modeling the behaviors that we just talked about to create an environment where that's encouraged, right? So it's one thing to say, I'm going to better myself, but to be vocal and to come out and speak to that truth, I think that's really important, because to Mitch's point, leaders have great intentions. They just don't know how, and it's so important and symbolic to have, somebody above you, somebody next to you to say, this is how I'm going about it, and be vulnerable in that situation and say, I don't know all of it, but I'm going to learn. And I encourage you to do the same and to perpetuate that sort of culture. I know Mitch has done that well in our organization. In fact, I was called out by our CEO as somebody who he goes to because Mitch just has a very different opinion and he values that. So I would add that we need to model that and show others that's what we should be doing.
I think that's huge. One of the things that I have seen in organizations as a part of this question is individuals choosing to go to lunch with someone or choosing to just spend time with someone that's just completely different, and who you may not normally have chosen or selected because they're not like you, but choosing to spend time and engage with someone and get to know them and their perspective and how they interpret certain things can be huge for your cultural competence and opening up your mind a lot of times to how narrow sometimes, as Mitch said and Rudy said and several of you said, how narrow your perspective and scope can be, especially as leaders. Anyone else want to share?
Arthur, I think there's 2 points that I really wanted to add on to all of what everyone has said. In my own experience, I think it's also important to realize that in doing this, because we're all stepping out of our comfort zones, is to be uncomfortable in certain situations, being open to being uncomfortable. And if someone, not only is it about reaching out to individuals, but if someone reaches out to you, accepting their invitation, even though it may be uncomfortable for you. So I think that's definitely one point I really wanted to make sure that people understood as we go through this process. It may not always be exactly what we wanted it to be. And then last but not least, it's also when you take a look at that network and realizing and learning about them and who they are as individuals, I think it's also embracing that culture and how that culture can really enhance your leadership and your ability to have a different view on the world. And I say this personally because when I was growing up, I was faced with a lot of adversity, right? So I actually started to just accept everyone as they were. And I didn't embrace their culture while I got to know them. I didn't, really understand how I could utilize that and elevate everything it was that I could do. And now that I've opened myself up to that, it's amazing to see the work that we can do in the community.
And just to build off of that, you also have to allow the people to be themselves. So a lot of times there's covering, right? So you will have somebody who works with you, but they can't bring their full selves to work, right? And you as a leader have to work to ensure that your people feel comfortable enough to bring their full selves to work. Because, you know, even if this person does have diversity of thought, even if this person does come from a different culture or a different gender, sometimes they are looking to say, well, to get ahead, I have to behave in this way, right? So you have to, as a leader, ensure that you are rewarding people when they do have that maybe that disagreement is not immediately seen as an affront to the status quo. So that's something that we, as everybody, really has to focus on.
Rudy, you have something?
Yeah, I'm just going to add one more thought that I had. You know, as a president and CEO that happens to be African American, I don't get a pass for all of the other skill sets that I need to be a president and CEO. Let me be real clear about that. So it's not a trade-off. It's like I still have to understand budget management. I still have to understand labor relations. I still have to know how to raise money. I still have to have community engagement. And oh, by the way, you know, organically, I create an environment of acceptance, right? And so I don't want to give anyone a pass that has to sit in a leadership position. I think it goes with the same skill sets that he or she needs to manage and handle that responsibility. So I just wanted to add that to the discussion.
All amazing insight, leaders. Incredible ad for our first question. If there's no other ad, we're going to go ahead to our second question. I know we have several of them. My second question is, during an unprecedented time of racial inequities and injustices all over the world, what are some key strategies that organizations can do to limit bias in the workplace development and advancement? Again, I'll read it again. During an unprecedented time of racial inequities and injustices all over the world, what are some key strategies that organizations can do to limit bias in workplace development and advancement? We'll start with Glenn, and then we'll let Mitch chime in.
Yeah, so this question hits home, particularly today. I'm pretty sure that most people know by now that the officers who murdered Breonna Taylor were not charged for her killing, and that has just kind of built on other inequities that we have seen from police brutality here in America to the COVID response and its unequal impact on communities of color, to the United States and around the world. All of these people in the community who are feeling this, they're also employees. You know, they work at Neighborhood House, they work at Bank of America, they work at Qualcomm, and they have to bring a lot of this stuff to work with them. So to make it seem like things. So there's the stuff that's happening at your job. No, it's actually both of those things are happening at the same time, and it bleeds over into what we see happening with our work. And particularly because of racial inequities are being highlighted, you know, as far as within society at their job. So here at Qualcomm, we've tried to foster those conversations, right? So instead of running away from those conversations and those difficult talks, you know, we said we're going to be more transparent. For the first time next year, we're going to publish our EEO1 data. We've actually had forums with our communities of color, with our senior executives. And I've moderated most of those discussions, and not all of those discussions are good discussions. They are asking hard questions, but questions that need to be asked. So for me, what I think of this, and I think my organization thinks of this as an opportunity. This is an opportunity to have really difficult discussions and to clear the air about what are the solutions to help our current employees, and then to help us to hire the next group of employees. So that's how we've approached it. But I would love to hear, I don't think all the time about, I would love to hear what Mitch has to say as well.
Thanks, man. I agree with everything you said. I think one of the things that is really important about this question and the answer is, how do you get rid of this type of bias within organizations? It does go back to what Glenn said about uncomfortable conversations. So often as African Americans, we expect that an incident happens and it's a topic of conversation for about a month, and then everybody stops talking about it like it got resolved. And it didn't. It's just, okay, it's been 30 days, let's move on. And one of the things that we talked about at Sempra, maybe it's been a part of this, is we're going through a moment right now as a nation, and you have to talk about it and keep talking about it and make it a focus and have actions attached to those discussions. And you have to create an example of what forward progress looks like. And when we have these conversations like Glenn's talking about internally, we're encouraging everybody to be a part of these conversations because it's a learning opportunity. It's a learning opportunity for some people about, I didn't realize that was offensive or that was proper. And it's a learning, and it's an opportunity for others who've been impacted to go, okay, I didn't realize that you didn't know that this was going on in my head, or I didn't realize how you felt. And so that's one. I think, these conversations need to be real. They need to be focused. They need to lead to actions. Two, we have to acknowledge that again, just because you're a leader, you've been designated as a leader, doesn't mean that you go back to what Rudy talked about, the word skill set, that you have the full tool belt of things that you need to be comprehensive in your leading and your discussions. And so, I think companies have to invest more in this. It's not just about watching an unconscious bias video once a year. It's not just about having, a discussion about gender equity once a year. There has to be an investment in leaders and the people that you want to be in the leadership track, so that you're continually improving their understanding of the world that we live in today and what happens. I've had people say to me, "Oh my God, I didn't know that." Right? I made a comment to someone one day. I said, "Look, as an African American male, I know what it's like to get pulled over for no reason at all, and to have an officer draw a gun on you." And people are like, "What?" Right? And I'm like, "This is such a shock to you. But to be blunt, let's go be a black in America." And they were like, "Well, and you could see there's some discomfort, right? But it's also an education, and part of what we as a company at Sempra and the utilities are looking at is how we diversify the people in that leadership discussion. Go back to what you said, Arthur. Go back to what we were talking about from the very beginning. Is we realize we're going to make better decisions as a company and as a leadership team the more diverse the opinions and the thoughts and the ideas are in the room. And that diversity will not just come from gender diversity, it'll come from ethnic diversity, it'll come from cultural diversity. And I think that corporations have to acknowledge this. They have to acknowledge that we are not nearly as educated about this conversation as we should. No company is. No matter how big you are. Jeff Bezos may be the wealthiest man in the world. He can still learn from his employees that don't look like him, right? Now, and I think that that's one of the things that we have. It's not a problem if you acknowledge that it is an issue and you're taking actions to address it. But we're not going to accomplish anything if we stop talking about things, and B, we stop taking actions to make sure we're increasing the diversity in the rooms when decisions are being made. And Rudy and I have had this conversation before. We are often judged, sometimes a little harshly, because we're black males, and we may not. Well, did they really have this skill set? Did they really do this? Could they really do that? And Glenn, you guys probably have this conversation at Qualcomm, and I think that part of that is just the bias that has been allowed to grow within business structures, and you have to make an assumption that, well, they may not have this skill set. Now, if I don't have the skill set, give me the opportunity to gain it. Tell me. I'm going to send you to this class. And I think that again, we can accomplish a lot if everybody acknowledges that it's not about one conversation and one action. It's a continual process of improvement, right? We're always looking at improving the bottom line. Let's look at improving the structure of the people and the knowledge of the people that are helping you achieve the bottom line results.
Can I piggyback on that? Because, you know, Mitch hit on something that emotionally struck a chord with me when he said, you know, putting African-American males in the game to perform and prove themselves, you know, to prove themselves on the field. You know, that is something for me that I've carried with me through my career. And I create windows of opportunity for what I call diamonds in the rough. Mm-hmm. Individuals that may not have flushed out or developed all of the skill sets, but they need an opportunity to get that, what I call depth and breadth of experience, so they can fly to a higher level. Those are windows of opportunity that I think we ought to be willing to create as leaders. No one comes out of school or out of trade school with all of those skill sets that they need to be successful immediately. And I think it's important as we look at folks of color or individuals that wouldn't ordinarily get that particular, you know, rite of passage professionally, to reach back and bring them along as well. And I think for me, it's been very key to ensure that I'm polishing off those diamonds in the rough, so to speak. And I don't even intend to keep them inside of my organization. I want to polish them up so they may leave us and benefit someone else and flourish, you know, professionally. So, you know, Mitch, you hit on something that struck a nerve with me, a good nerve. And I hope folks are writing that down, to reach back and give individuals an opportunity that you wouldn't ordinarily give that opportunity to.
Yeah, Rudy, and I'll just take I'll give you a great example that happened recently. We were in a discussion about a young man who, African American, and someone goes, well, he's doing well, but he has some maturity issues, right? Okay, and then everybody was like ready to move on, and I said, well, wait a minute. How are we going to take this diamond? Because we're acknowledging that he has all the skills. How are we going to polish the diamond so he's ready for the next step, and, you know, quickly? Because if you're just going to drop it at that and go, well, we're moving on, then as you just said, Rudy, it's leaders' responsibility to say, let me help this person get to the next level. So it's not enough to just identify an issue or a skill set that's it's everything to make sure that actually gets developed.
So panelists, you are giving us so much in-depth insight and information around this topic. I want to throw a couple of different terms out at you and see if any of the other panelists want to chime in as well. When we consider some key strategies that organizations can do to limit bias around workforce development and advancement, what are your thoughts around things such as allyship, you know, sponsorship, mentorship? What are your thoughts around some of those programs and opportunities that organizations can take advantage of to either advance women, to advance people of color, to advance, you know, either veterans or LGBTQ community? Just want to throw that out there too. I know this is unplanned, but if any of the panelists want to chime in or speak to that, again, allyship, sponsorship, and mentorship, if any of you want to speak to any of those.
Well, one of the things that I subscribe to are special projects, right? That may be on a rotational basis. And you've heard me say this before, Arthur. You know, I subscribe to 6 to 9 month special assignments that build skill set and develops experience so that individuals can take that experience and compete at a higher level, right? Because oftentimes what we find ourselves in is a situation where we have limited experience. So you're trying to fight and compete against folks that has a far greater depth and breadth of experience because you just never had an opportunity to work at that level. So if you can spend 6 to 9 to 12 months doing something, when you go to compete the next time, you can draw from that experience and you're in a better position. So special assignments, I think, serves us well.
Great insight, Rudy. Thank you. Anyone else?
You know, I will say this. I think that when you mentioned one of the things I will say that is really important for
Mitch, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Okay. One of the things that I will say that is really important about mentoring is we always make the assumption that everyone knows how to mentor, right? And so sometimes employees will be like, hey, were you mentoring? And I'm a big believer, and I've said this internally recently, that we need to make sure that all of our leaders are investing in future leaders, and everybody needs to mentor at least 2 people. And I would even go as far as saying, in particular, you need to mentor 2 people of color. But you then have to give them the template on how to mentor. Because some people, if I go to Rudy and say, will you mentor me? And Rudy says, all right. And we sit in his office and we talk for about 15, 20 minutes. And Rudy said special assignments. And Rudy's like, well, I met with you a few times. You know, defining mentoring is really important. So in organizations, if you're looking at things of this nature, sometimes, you know, you have to get some help. And Mimi knows that we have an aggressive department on D&I and HR and organizational development. It's okay to provide that template. If you want to get results, provide that template, and that way it's a lot easier to demand results, because it's a lot easier when you provide that template to say at the end of a year, you received the template, you provided the mentoring and the guidance, and did you see the improvement in that person you're mentoring, and what else do they need? But if not, if left to it, some people are like, I'm just going to check the box. I met with somebody 4 times last year. Well, did they get anything out of it? I think so. Well, that's a wrong answer. So.
Yeah. All right, I'll add these programs, these terms, these concepts are all important because they need it to be, right? There's some gap in our society, in our companies. And so the idea of allyship come up, yes, informally support somebody. Mentoring came along because we recognized that some people were left out of opportunities. And then sponsorship came along because we realized mentoring wasn't enough. You really have to make sure that that person you're developing gets an opportunity. But I think success lies in really how the companies execute this. And I say this because I know many of us sit in organizations, I've seen it, I've heard from organizations that have had mixed results, right? Because immediately people will say, well, that's just creating, you're creating opportunities and you're only targeting a certain group. And in this day and age, we're only talking about Blacks and African Americans. Well, that's because there is a gap in that area, right? So if I were to go back to, another country where there's another gap, you might see that the efforts are focused on that. So it's incumbent on the company when they implement these programs to really articulate in such a way that employees don't have this reaction to, wait, so now if I'm straight white male, I don't get a part of this pie, right? Because you've got to have that conversation. Who wouldn't want a company and an organization where your bias doesn't decide that, right? If you walk into an organization, if you walk into a job opportunity and you were assured the person making the decision isn't going to pick somebody like them or some aspect that isn't related to their qualification, everybody gains from that. But we have to do, and it's unfortunate because that work lies on the people who are trying to get that opportunity, but it's incumbent that we keep having a conversation. It's about leveling the playing field. It isn't about favoring anyone. And in fact, when we say, women tend to apply for a job less frequently because they don't qualify and they don't meet, X amount of qualification where someone else does. Well, the same is true when you look at any underrepresented group. Mitch and Rudy talked about this. There's this constant imposter syndrome, like you're somehow not good enough, that if you get an opportunity, you've got to think, did I really deserve that? That really gets into your psyche. And that's what people from underrepresented groups are dealing with from day to day. So as a company, yes, all of those are important, but how we go about it so that everybody's on board is the only way we'll have success.
Mimi, you said so much there, and I'm dying to dive into some of it, but I'm gonna I'm gonna keep it open. But there's so much that you just unloaded for us in just that statement. Any other panelists want to share and chime in?
I think I can add. I think you're 100% right. Mimi just like put the whole bucket down. So I'm gonna take one part of what she was talking about. But that was a great response, Mimi. When and I think this was kind of said a little bit earlier by Mitch. I think that we have to make sure that we really lay down the parameters of the relationship. So if you are a mentor, be a mentor. Whenever I mentor somebody new, I ask them, what do you expect to get from the relationship? We lay it out, we talk about it. We talk about short-term, medium-term, long-term goals. We even put, like, I know not everybody does this, but we even put like a time frame. We put a year on it and then say, well, we will check back in a year and then see if we've met any of these goals. Because I think that's necessary. But if you're asking somebody to be a sponsor, that's different than a mentor, right? Like a sponsor is a person who will stand up for you. A sponsor is a person who will go into the rooms that you're currently not in, and will advocate for you to get opportunities that you maybe wouldn't have been considered for in normal circumstances. And I think that sponsorship part is where we are really lacking in underrepresented groups, because a lot of times we don't have people who look like us in those senior roles, and those senior roles are a lot of times are the ones who are doing the sponsoring. So I call on my senior executive to sponsor a person who is of a different ethnicity or gender, and take them under their wing and sponsor that person. And to me, you get two different things from that, right? First of all, the person who is being sponsored gets face time with a senior executive within Qualcomm. But on the flip side, the senior executive gets experience with somebody who, as we all kind of mentioned before, people have like that narrow blinder, and if you look at like who is in their social circle, a lot of times it's people who are very much like them. Now that senior executive is also getting the ability to have somebody else diverse within their social circle. So when I see that, I see it as a win-win for both parties. But once again, when you have those relationships, at the start, you have to lay down the parameters of what that relationship is going to be.
Yeah. Arthur, I'll just say this: that you're right on the sponsorship difference, because so often, Glenn, what I was saying about the mentorship is when you ask your senior executives to mentor, I'm expecting that they mentor properly, they then are going to become that sponsor, because they're going to be able to stay at the table when the decisions are being made. And this person has been listening, doing and learning and growing, and I believe that this person has a real opportunity in these 4 leadership roles that we're looking at. Let's make that decision. But so you're right. It's terminal. You're absolutely right. There's a difference between mentorship and sponsorship. I assume that if you mentor someone, it's you're mentoring them so that you can speak about them as a sponsor because you've watched that growth. So I agree with you.
Again, thank you so much, panelists. Amazing discussion, amazing dialogue. We're going to go ahead to our next question. My next question is, what advice would you give to someone who wants to be a more inclusive leader or who wants to create a more inclusive team? I'll read the question again. What advice would you give to someone who wants to be a more inclusive leader or wants to create a more inclusive team? We're going to start with Mimi on this one, and then we'll jump to Rudy, and then anyone else who wants to share.
Thanks, Art, for the question. So I was thinking about this, even before I got into D&I, and we've worked with leaders and we've counseled, informally. I think inclusive leadership for me, shares the same 3 ideas. And those are, first, awareness, right? Leading requires you to know yourself. You've heard everybody talk about it here, like recognize your own bias, understand that we gravitate towards really homogenous, groups, and that's understandable. I'm going to go to lunch with somebody who eats the same food as me because we like that, right? You might watch a sports game with somebody who likes the same team. I'm not going to sit across the room from somebody who is cheering for somebody else. But recognizing that is one thing, and then being able to stretch yourself to say, well, what kind of leader will you be? Will you be the type that wants people to come in and, really stay in their lanes? Or did you bring those people onto your team because you want them to challenge you and bring that diversity of perspective? Do you create an environment where you say, I know how I am, I know where my preferences, and I'll sometimes not use the word bias because it has all sorts of negative connotations these days, but we all have preferences. Are you letting your preferences dictate who shows up in your meeting, who's sharing, who's talking, or are you intentionally inviting somebody different from you to participate? So awareness, just knowing who you are. Number two, I think it's empathy. And I'm sure I'll get a lot of head nods here. We've been holding a lot of community conversations, as Mitch mentioned, in the face of this racial justice movement. I'm glad we're doing so. And one of the ground rules we always start out with is assume that what's true for your colleagues is true for them, even if it's not true for you. So when we talk about difficult situations or discrimination, not having had that experience doesn't make you the problem, but denying that it exists absolutely does, right? So, do you have the empathy to say, it might not be for me, but I understand that someone has this other experience? And in the workplace, that could be, are you scheduling meetings that are mindful of parents or caretakers, right? And we always say parents and caretakers because just because you don't have kids doesn't mean you don't have other responsibilities. But are you mindful of, people who are on camera these days? Like, what stress factors are they under? I mean, COVID forced all of us into everyone's home. We didn't get an invitation. We didn't get a door knock, right? So if people aren't comfortable coming on camera, utilize some of that empathy. Why is it? What is uncomfortable about that situation? And just let that be. What's true for them, it may not be true for you. And then the third thing I would say is courage. As leaders, all of us have positional power and we have personal power. And how are we using that to really make a greater difference, right? Again, do you expect everyone to walk in line, or do you create an environment where you say, I want you to challenge me. I want you to tell me, I don't need everybody to sit and agree with everybody, but I want to invite constructive debate, right? And I'm going to call out where there are gaps. And we're doing that more intentionally. I think every organization is, rightly so. But having the courage to call out what's wrong, work on it, and then asking your teams and modeling that behavior so that your teams can also do the same, where they know it's safe to speak up, right? So my thoughts, again, are just take the time to build some self-awareness. We have an activity where you look at everything about everyone said, but including like, who do you trust as your doctor? I have a preference, probably a gender preference, probably a race preference, but knowing that, right? So take some time to be honest with yourself. Do you really need to be that particular about this? Or can there be some room? Show empathy and understanding in action, right? Not just, okay, I get what you're at, but we're still going to do this. But empathy means, all right, I know that you have to take your kids or feed your kids at noon. You're going to work at a different time in this day and age. Not everybody's 9 to 5, right? And then the courage to do right and keep at it, because none of this changes overnight. And if we're not willing to work on it, we don't have the courage to work on it, nothing will change. So I say good leaders are the ones that support good ideas and all that, but inclusive leaders really challenge and welcome and invite those opinions.
Incredible feedback. Thank you so much, Mimi. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Rudy, you have anything?
Yeah, I do. And then I'm going to tell an old SWAC story. First of all, let me say this. It has to be organic. I grew up in the inner city right here on 31st and Ocean View. And one of the things that poverty teaches you is that it doesn't matter, the color of your skin or your gender. When you're all living in poverty, your acceptance of each other, because you need each other to survive. And that has kind of been the foundation for me growing up, to to accepting everyone where they are, where they come from. And it's organic for me as a leader. But I want to tell a quick SWAC story that really speaks to the previous question. I came out of Crawford High School, signed with Texas Southern University in the sport of football. In my very first game, we played a team called Mississippi Valley State. So I may invite your listeners to look up SWAC and look up Mississippi Valley State. This was in 1984. And I had heard all week about this dynamite receiver that they had, but, you know, coming out of Crawford High School and not knowing about the SWAC, I had no idea who this individual was. And about his third touchdown into the game, I quickly understood how special this player was, who went on to play and star for the San Francisco 49ers. His name was Jerry Rice. I was watching greatness in 1984 in my first SWAC game. Now, why did I tell this story? Because greatness comes from everywhere in this country. It doesn't necessarily come from the places that you expect it to come from. And at that time, the NFL was not going to the SWAC and recruiting and selecting in the first round talent out of the SWAC. Jerry Rice changed that trajectory. It was based on the opportunity that the San Francisco 49ers gave him. And that would not have taken place had the 49ers not gone and recruited from the SWAC. So the moral of my story is you don't know where this talent is coming from professionally. And we have to be open to looking in other places other than the usual places that we go and find our talent. And so that's my SWAC story. And I'm proud to say I knew Jerry Rice was going to be great that evening right there in Houston, Texas, that I witnessed him catch 4 touchdown passes on us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rudy. I appreciate that. Does anyone have any of the panelists have any other insight, any other share that you want to give on some advice you would give to someone who wants to be a more inclusive leader or wants to build a more inclusive team? Any other panelists want to chime in? Okay.
I think I just say this, that, you know, Arthur, again, I think everybody knows this. You can't be more inclusive if you're not talking about what's missing and what you need, right? The conversation, communication. We emphasize the importance of communication every day in this country, in every building, in every situation. If you cannot be an effective communicator, then you're going to struggle. And I think that you cannot actually build an inclusive environment if people aren't talking about what's missing, what's wrong, what's right, what we need to be focused on, what we need to avoid. And so it's really, it's you. And again, even though I say it's about communication, communication is not always easy. And sometimes it has to be uncomfortable to get better.
Thank you so much, Mitch. We're going to go ahead to our final question. And our final question is, why is the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work important? And why should organizations commit to launching a strategic plan? I'll say it again. Why is the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work important? And why should organizations commit to launching a strategic plan? We're going to start with Mimi on that one, and then we'll go to Glenn, and then we'll open it up to the panelists.
Thanks, Art, for the question. I think if anybody was to just Google the term business case for D&I, they will find a ton of stats. And Glenn's probably laughing because he's had to do a million presentations where he says, this is why you have to have diversity and inclusion on your team. But in case there are any doubters out there, we'll do this. If the entire idea of making sure that we do the right thing doesn't tug at your heartstring, and if you are somehow a math person or you're responsible for the company bottom line, let me volunteer a few stats that I found that I use quite a bit. Just on the idea of performance. Companies with D&I programs see a 42% improvement on team collaboration. Not me, Deloitte study, right? So there's sources for all these. 78% greater capacity for innovation. I know Sherry used the example of an escape room, and that comes from experience. If you go to an escape room with people who think just like you, you're not getting out. True. But if you go to an escape room with somebody different from you and you solve problems because of the diversity of perspective, you will do better. On profitability, gender diverse companies are 21% more likely to have better financial returns. Companies with racial and ethnic diversity, 33% more likely to outperform the industry peers. From a cultural standpoint, leaders that have give diverse voices equal airtime, right? By that we mean we encourage an environment where dissenting views are encouraged, and we invite people to challenge us. Those companies are nearly twice as likely as others to unleash value-driving insights. So in other words, if you don't ask, how will you ever get that other creative, innovative idea from folks, right? And employees in a speak-up culture, meaning their psychological safety, you're free to say what you want to say professionally without being fear of reprimanding or fear of retaliation, are 3.5 times more likely to contribute their full potential. So all that to say, if you are responsible for a bottom line, or if you're any sort of data person, we're not talking about like little itsy bitsy percentages, right? We're talking about proven statistically significant value to having diversity and inclusion. But beyond that, I mean, having those things are great ads, but I think a lack of diversity, you also have to look at as contributing to loss, right? So anyone who's in talent or recruitment will know it costs a lot more money to bring on somebody new, train them, onboard them, than it is to keep and develop your workforce. So, but if people don't feel like they belong or are respected or can contribute, they leave. If you don't feel like there are opportunities, they leave, right? So it's really incumbent on the company to build a strategic plan. And as we say now, really looking at gap areas. It's not enough to say, all right, let's make sure that we've got gender and people of color and we've got 50%. Slice that and dice that. You know, Mitch is part of the council with us, and we've been looking at the top 3 organizations in our company. You could look at all leadership and it looks pretty rosy. Then you start to slice and dice, and there's some serious gaps that we need to address. So you have to be intentional about that. You have to acknowledge those gaps, be honest with yourselves, and then build a plan, because as you all seen, I mean, lots of companies have been doing D&I, but why don't we have equity? Why don't we have better representation in our organization? Well, I think a lot of that has to do with because we're not practicing it daily, right? We're always having to really work at it. We haven't done enough. So to anybody who says, well, I've got a great D&I program, I've got a team, that's not enough. You have to work at it, because any meaningful change is going to take time. And it's unfortunate that we're at this moment in time where we're kind of finally looking at this, and hopefully it doesn't fade with the news cycle, as they say. But we have to be intentional in looking at our gaps. We have to build a plan, because nothing will change if we just decide that that is the flavor of the month. This is work of decades, and hope it continues, whether or not, you know, you are in that organization or somebody else takes on. But those are my thoughts.
That was great, Mimi. It's always hard going after her because she took a lot of my points, but
that's why I have to go first.
Exactly. There you go. No. She had to have been in one of my presentations because she used a lot of my numbers. But no. But seriously though, all the numbers that she pointed out are completely correct. And you don't take my word for it. There are a ton of published reports that go into this. This is statistically significant. We get better returns when we have more diverse leadership and more diverse organizations. So to me, that, and I think that Mimi has really kind of really articulated that case. Now another case, particularly in my field, which is tech, the reason why we need to focus on DEI is because we are running out of workers. Like there are a limited amount of workers, and if we just go through the same process that we have always done, we're just not going to have enough people for the jobs of the future. So we need to turn over every rock. We need to ensure that we are partnering with our communities to have STEM education in neighborhoods that hadn't had STEM education. So with Qualcomm, we actually partner with a lot of the local schools to say, these are going to be the skills, for the future economy, and we have to teach our kids and everybody, from no matter what race they are, no matter what gender they are. If we want to have this employment base, we're going to have to get everybody these skills, right? That is just survival. Like right now, a lot of companies are talking about opening up centers in India, changing how their work structures are, because we don't actually we're not investing enough in our communities, right? So that's also a big part as we're trying to do DEI, is not just within the company as a whole, but it's actually partnering with our local communities as well, to kind of create that next level of leadership. On top of that, we talk about hiring people into these organizations. Women in particular, they are becoming a bigger share of new grads coming into tech. Unfortunately, at around the 8th year, a lot of women are dropping out of tech, right? So they'll be in tech for like 8 years, and then they'll take a break, and it's a lot less likely that they actually come back into tech. These could be our future leaders, these could be our future CEOs, these could be our future directors. But the reason why they're not coming back is because we aren't creating an environment that welcomes them back, right? Like we are, if they take time off to either start a family, to care for a loved one, when they try to come back, a lot of times they're punished. Their careers stalled. They aren't given any flexibility. So I think at our company and a lot of other companies, what we're trying to do is to figure out, how can we keep those people? Because every person that we lose who has been with our company for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, that's all that investment that we made that entire time. That investment is gone now, right? So once again, just looking at it from a selfish point of view, from the company's perspective, first of all, we need talent. So that's why DEI is important. And then second of all, we invest a ton of work and time and effort to actually build that talent up into a productive part of our company, who will be a future leader of our company. And we don't want to just lose that talent at that point. So for us, it's necessary. It's a part of our business strategy. And if we don't do it, it's going to hurt our company down the line, because every other company is doing it.
A lot of great insight, Glenn and Mimi. Thank you so much. We're going to open it up to our panelists. Does anyone else have something to share?
Yeah,
I just wanted to add and follow on with Glenn. I mean, not only is it important for our investment of our associates, to your point, I mean, the amount it takes to hire and train and invest in that particular associate, and to lose them is just I can't even, I have no words. But from a Bank of America perspective, considering how large a company we are, if we didn't treasure and have inclusion at the heart of what we do for our associates, we are a service-oriented company to serve clients who bank with us. And if we can't relate to those clients, to Glenn's point, like, everybody is doing it, not that that's the reason as to why, but we need to be able to relate to the communities that we serve. And yes, we are a financial institution, and yes, it's money, but I do truly think that we do care, and in order to relate to our clients and serve them to the best capacity, it's necessary from that standpoint.
Thank you, Pamela. Mitch, you had something?
I was just going to make one comment on the plan. I think that if when companies create a plan, entities create a plan, they're acknowledging that there's room for improvement, and that improvement is important to the culture and the company and the entity. Those who don't want to create a plan aren't acknowledging any issues. That never gets you anywhere. So the plan has to be real, and it has to be executed, and it has to be meaningful, and you have to communicate about it. And if you don't have a plan, then you don't. Yeah.
Thank you, Mitch. Anyone else? All right. Thank you so much, panelists, for all of the incredible dialogue and discussion around our questions. That concludes our portion of the panel discussion. Thank you so much, everyone. We're going to go ahead and turn this over back over to Sherry.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, great discussion.
Wow. I feel like I've been at the tribal council meeting. I Zoom bombed the tribal council meeting. It's amazing. Oh my gosh. Not worthy. That was amazing. We did get a few questions from people, and as we go through the next half hour or so, please feel free to continue to drop your questions in the chat box. But regarding question one about that, I thought was such a terrific way to launch this, Arthur, is to start with yourself, right? Because leadership is an inside job. I hope you all agree with that. But Dale Ganzow is with us today, and he was wondering, how does a leader do a self-assessment of biases that he or she may carry but doesn't recognize? Dale, would you like to unmute yourself and expand on that question, and please introduce yourself too? Hello, this is Dale. He may not be with us anymore.
Hi, Sherry. I'm still here. Well, thanks. Always.
He's muted
Whoops.
again.
You muted again.
Sorry about that. So I always think of myself as enlightened, but I know that deep down I carry some biases. I suspect others do too. And how do you do a rigid self-assessment, if you will, to make sure that you're trying to find out, that you do find out what you need to work on? That's my question.
Panelists, anyone want to chime in about ways in which leaders can take assessments and find out maybe what areas they should be paying attention to?
Well,
go ahead, Mitch.
No, go ahead. Yeah, I'll wait for you.
So I have two practical things. One is, if you look up implicit bias tests, and I know my friends in D&I know this, Harvard has developed a series of tests that will allow you to evaluate on your own. You sit in front of a computer, answer quizzes, and it will let you know if you have bias or a variety of dimensions, whether it's age, race, and so many other things. So that's something you could start with, just to say. And Dale, you're right. We all have bias, right? To me, that's not the problem. The willingness to address it is. So I appreciate you raising that. But that's one. And then two, like I said, I've done this as an exercise with teams before, where you literally, actually I've done this in a low tech setting, and then we've had Sempra is lucky to be part of the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion. And we had this museum of a bus, if you will, virtual reality bus that came in. And as part of that, there was an exercise in there where you could basically go through and I'll ask you, again, who's your doctor? Who is your friend? Who are the last 5 people you had dinner with? And just asking those everyday questions will help you look at, wow, how much do I really stay with what's comfortable, or where can I start to branch out a little more? So it doesn't solve your entire problem. I think it's just having a step to acknowledge where are some of your preferences.
I think that's great insight, Mimi. First of all, let me just say, I think it is hugely important that if you are a leader, it is very important that you do know your biases. You know the areas that you need to be aware of. I think that's hugely important. And Mimi, I concur with all of the areas in which you said, or all the ways in which you said, as leaders, we can go through assessments and self-assess and be aware of those areas. I would probably just add, the people that you spend time with. Ask people who know you. Hey, do you feel like, are there any blind spots? Are there any areas or opportunities that you feel like I may operate in? sometimes that can be uncomfortable, but a lot of times when you have great people who work around you or who are part of your life, those individuals who know you best can help point out blind spots or can help point out opportunities for you to be aware of and be cognizant of as a leader. Any other panelists want to share?
Yeah, I would just build off your point, Arthur. That was exactly what I was going to say. Either A, just talking to your friends, but in a work setting, also anonymous 360 feedback. So I normally, like every year, I'll ask my team just some real, like, kind of pointed leadership questions. You know, what are some of the things that I can improve on? You know, what are some of the traits that they've seen from me? And I allow them to do it anonymously. Like, if they want to say, you know, who it is, by all means. But it allows me to kind of see both, because I already get, you know, feedback from some of my senior leaders. But it allows me to see if there is any, at least even the impression that there is some bias in some of my actions. Another thing that I like to do is to look at objective data. Right. So let's say if you're a hiring manager, Dale, look at the last few times that you had an open position, and then say, okay, well, so I had 3 open positions. I hired a white male every single time. Right. Then really look back at all of the candidates and then see if there was something that like, if there was another candidate that had similar skills or something that you may have overlooked. You know, even like I have done this as well, and somebody brought this to my attention. So you can also have somebody else kind of look over your candidates as well. So you kind of get that third party view. But I was hiring people from certain schools, and they said, "Did you notice that, like, you know, your last three hires have been from this certain conference?" And I was like, "Huh, I did not know that. Let me look at that again." And now I take that into account, just like when I'm looking through the prism of like these job applications. Like, am I weighing things the same? So once again, so looking for opportunities for objective data has really been helpful for me.
I love that. I love how Mimi said, just assume that you're biased. Let's start with that. You don't need to take a test. I know that. I love Mimi's so direct, and her answers are perfect. Love that. Thank you all. Let's move on, because we've got some other great questions. We also had a question around number 2. Terrell Simmons was asking, what can managers or leaders do to create a safe and productive dialogue around race and systemic racism in the workplace? I think there was some real transparent dialogue within this group today, and a lot of people might think, oh my God, I would cringe. There's no way that we would say these things in my workplace. Where do you start? Terrell, do you want to expand on that at all and introduce yourself if you're still with us? Okay, well, I think you get the gist of the question. Right?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I think one of the places that you can start would be just like we're doing this evening. You bring in subject matter experts from outside of the organization that can really speak to some of the issues, so it's not so personal and folks aren't running the corners inside of your organization. And it also gives your employee base an opportunity to reflect, hear some of the information, and ask additional questions. And then once that process is done, I think you start the hard work of gathering that data and starting to work through within your system, you know, areas that you need to improve on. But I think you kind of break the ice, so to speak, with panelists that may be in the industry, that may be able to come and speak freely and speak about their own individual and collective experiences that will start the dialogue for your organization.
And just to get off that real quick, Rudy, one of the things that we did to actually break the ice when we had our people of color talk to our senior leaders is the first session. So we normally did 2 sessions. The first session was really just a listening session. So it was, it was more one-way conversation, just giving them a forum to actually talk and to really speak their truth. And I think Mimi said a great point, kind of going in with an open mind and saying that even if it's not your truth, like assume that it's their truth, right? So that's the first conversation. And then a lot of times the leaders kind of take the information that they were given, because a lot of times it's the first time that they're hearing it, and they actually internalize it, get some empathy. We talk about the information that like me and the leader talk about the information that was said in the listening session. And then we help to equip the leader. So for the next session, which is more like a working session, which is talking about solutions, the leader feels that they have the tools to actually help the employee or to try to reduce the bias that the employees are feeling.
Okay, anyone else? That was terrific. I really, gosh, I appreciate it. Having my organization does a lot of culture transformation work, and it just makes such a difference to have that outside perspective, because you're really trying to change the culture here. And it's really hard to change your culture from within inside the culture. It's really hard to do that. So it helps to somebody, an objective person who isn't subject to the constructs. I've never heard running the corners before. I love that. I've never heard that before. What a great image. It's great. Dr. Lydia Knopf, I was asking a question. There was a lot of terms, allyship, sponsorship, mentorship, that sort of thing. Lydia, you said you were familiar with the term sponsor, and you were wondering if it's the same as allyship. I think Glenn did a good job of kind of, even parsing out sponsorship and mentorship. One is very active, much more engaged in the success of the person that they're sponsoring. Lydia, do you have any other questions to add to that?
No further question. I was just asking for clarification. Mm-hmm. I had not heard the allyship term before.
Mm-hmm. The time that we're in right now is a time when this is another issue for culture transformation. For most of you, you are so deep into this space that there are so many terms, even terms that we think we could figure out what they are. You're in a wonderful, safe space where you can talk about what it is that you talk about, really do the deep thinking of that diverse, the diverse group instead of the homogenous group. You really want to get it right. You're sharing ideas, you're participating, you're showing up, you're dedicating 2 hours of a Wednesday afternoon to talk about this. And so it's absolutely amazing. So I think that what I'm concerned about, though, is that when do you start to hook on to where we are now and what our understanding of these terms are? How do we make sure we codify and clarify and not get too far ahead of the layman?
I will jump in and speak. I think for me, to give clarity to allyship, my understanding and perspective, and any of the panelists can chime in and add or give their reference. Whenever I address the concept of allyship, it really has to do with the practice of emphasizing this social justice, this inclusion, and this human rights perspective, but it operates within an organization. So someone can be a ally oftentimes of a group that they do not necessarily belong to. So allyship could be someone who is allying for LGBTQ employees, or can be allying for veterans or for the disabled, and they may not necessarily belong to that group, but they can operate and use their position of influence to advocate and to ally for these groups or these social justice issues and concerns. Now, that is my take from allyship, but I want to open it up to our panelists if anyone wants to share their perspective.
Yeah, the
I
way.
think for us. Oh,
sorry. Go ahead.
no.
No,
Go ahead. I'll go.
Ahead. You got it.
I was just going to say for us here at Bank of America, we first and foremost have a lot of employee networks because we encourage our associates to bring their whole selves to work. So we have all of those, but just to what Arthur was saying is we also have ally networks. So in addition to our LGBTQ group, we have an ally group. So individuals have actually marked themselves on a internal public domain within Bank of America and have actually stated that they are an ally for LGBTQ. We're also creating allyships for our Black professionals group. We're creating that for every component that we have here. And for us, it definitely is that definition that Arthur had said, but I think for a big corporation, it also allows us to showcase that you can feel comfortable and reach out to me because I am an ally to you, and it breaks down that barrier in a informal way.
Yeah, I think that both Pamela and Arthur are completely correct. The way that I normally break it down is an ally is a supporter, so you can be either part of that. You may not part of that group, but you support the people who are in that group. A mentor is an advisor, so somebody who really gives you information and knowledge and to help you in your career. And then a sponsor is a champion. So the sponsor is a person who is going to bat for you, normally like they are in a more senior role than you are, or in a more senior position, and they are going to bat for you. And when we're talking about in a corporate sense, they're going to bat for you for your career. So that's a simple way of putting it. I mean, it doesn't encompass everything, but I just go supporter, advisor, champion.
Great, Glenn. I like that.
Ready for another? Okay, those are maybe softballs. Let's see if Lisa Neal has a tougher question. She had a question to follow up on that. What are some practical ways that we as leaders can develop those sponsorship, mentorship relationships so that it doesn't look like favoritism among peers, and at the same time encourage other leaders within the organization to follow suit? So how can we model doing it in a way that doesn't look like favoritism? Is that right, Lisa?
That's right, Sherry. First of all, I just want to say you all are amazing, and I am just soaking all of this up. This has been wonderful. Yes, I think it's sometimes a fine line that a leader has to walk in trying to really develop this inclusive culture, and at the same time, get other people on board with that, having that mindset of stepping outside of yourself, right? Recognizing I have a bias, I'm stepping outside myself and really look at the potential of someone and go into their world and kind of lock arms with them without it causing somewhat of a divisive atmosphere in that person's looked at as the favorite, right?
Yeah.
And I can say it's so needed. I was at a company, first of all, I have to shout out to Bank of America because I know when I came to San Diego, my credit was in the tubes. I was in the darkest part of my life. And I was not anyone that they would offer, credit to or anything like that. But they had a program where they worked with me to build that up. And now I'm like, I can buy a couple houses if I want to, So I'm saying that they looked outside of themselves and so, okay, there's potential here. In terms of an organization, how can you do that? I've been real fortunate to be among leaders who do that well, but there's a backside to that where now you're growing somebody on one end, but on the other end, other people are a little disgruntled because they feel that they're not getting their fair share. So I think maybe as leaders, everyone can start thinking of how can I be a part of a solution and bringing the company forward instead of looking at, well, where's my piece of the pie? So I just want you to kind of address it from that standpoint. How can you walk that line, that tightrope?
I'll add some of my own personal insight onto this, Lisa. we'll go back to what Glenn said about sponsorship, advocate at the table when decisions are being made. When we're at the table talking about who to put where and leadership, new leadership opportunities, it is supposed to be an open dialogue and where the people there are weighing in on, yes, this person has the skill set and would be a good choice, or I had, this is something this person seems to be missing based on the interaction I had. And, I think the specific way that you get around the favoritism aspect is, as I mentioned earlier, I believe that once you reach a certain level within a company in particular, it should be a part of your development plan that you are mentoring someone else and / sponsoring someone else, especially when you get to director and officer level of a big company. And I think that sometimes we have to acknowledge that it is easy for people to go, oh, I'm gonna mentor / sponsor someone who's a lot like me, right? So I'm not actually getting outside my comfort zone. And I think it's okay for leaders to say, hey, if Glenn says, hey, look, Mitch, I want you to sponsor this person, or Pamela, I want you to sponsor that person, and then tell me what they're missing, right? Come back to me. Then you're not allowing people to kind of just pick their comfort zone, but you're telling them what you'd like for them to do, and you're saying, I'm holding you accountable for this. And then once you get to the table and you're advocating for someone, everybody might say, well, you're advocating for this person aggressively, and is there a little bit of favoritism? I think that's always going to be an aspect that may come up if you're pushing too hard. But because anytime you talk about sponsorship, people are going to say, well, wait a minute, you're picking this person over everybody else and you're sponsoring. And I don't think I think you have to truly encourage your leaders, the leaders of your company, again, step outside of their comfort zone, help partner them with people, and then bring them back to tell you what you aren't saying and what needs to be known. And I think that's the best way. Look, we often, in big companies in particular, run into this. There's a level of, if you're asking me to mentor or sponsor someone, am I picking my replacement? Right? And people get a little squeamish about that. As I don't want to mentor and sponsor too hard because I don't want to be passed on the ladder, right? And again, these are things that are conversations we have to acknowledge. And sponsorship and mentoring, has to be sincere. But there is that element of, I don't want to be passed. And if I pick this person to sponsor, mentor, I know they're not going to pass me, but I can help them get where I want them to. And that's where you run into problems. And we just have to acknowledge that in the room. And as leaders of companies and leaders of units and organizations, we have to help guide this with that right frame of mind of how do I get the best outcome possible. And I don't need favoritism. I need people to be developed. And I need people to be, when they're developed, I need you to advocate for them and tell me why they belong in the conversation. And so that's my opinion.
Yeah. I was going to say something similar, Mitch. When I talked about special assignments, I created a position called liaison to the president's office. And that was a position that was meant to be on a rotational basis for forever. I mean, it's not a full-time permanent position in our budget, but it's in our budget, and it's meant to be an opportunity to select 4 individuals that are on a 6-month rotation. And after 6 months of working directly with my office, those individuals are in a better position to compete for internal opportunities and external opportunities inside the organization. But here's the piece that I think is even more special. It's the 5 and 10 minutes that they get to spend with me directly as we're going through and debriefing or uploading on their special assignments. It's that opportunity to speak to the president and CEO directly and be able to offer, helpful hints like, Are you thinking about going back and getting a graduate degree? Do you want to go back and get your law degree? Do you want to go and get this training or that training? Have you thought about, budget management and what type of budgets you need to be managing to be more competitive? Things of that nature, things that I didn't get, when I was going through engineering school, things that I didn't get when I was in my master's program, but I got from Jack McGorry when I was his council liaison at the city of San Diego, if you understand what I'm saying. And it was the 5 and 10 minute conversations I had with Jack that was more precious than the actual assignment. And I think that's how you create those mentee mentorships. And they can be formal, but if you do it on a rotational basis and you allow everyone to compete for that opportunity, I think it lessens some of that stress around favoritism inside of your organization. And what you find out is not everybody wants the opportunity to work with the president and CEO. Newsflash. Some folks are happy just doing exactly what they're doing, right? It's too much pressure to be in his office for 5 minutes. They think I'm a bite or do something, and I'm not going to do any of that, but try to uplift them and educate them. So that's kind of been my thing. I learned that from Jack McGorry. It's worked for us, and a lot of those individuals have gone on outside of this organization to do great things.
Yeah, Rudy, I would, your 10-minute point is absolutely correct. I have something that I was doing before we had COVID and we're working from home, but I was doing it regularly. I had what I called 10-minute check-ins. And you might be walking down campus and see me and say, hey, Mitch, I've heard you do these 10-minute check-ins. And that 10-minute time slot, you come in, my assistant will put you on the calendar, and we talk about what you're working on. We talk about what you're focused on next as the next challenge. And we talk about what you need to do, what you think your shortfalls are that you need some help developing. And I use those 10-minute check-ins to try and provide some guidance and some support and some enthusiasm about staying focused. And it's funny you mentioned that not everybody wants it. I remember one check-in, the person said to me, I don't want to do anything more what I'm doing. I don't want the pressure. I'm happy going home at night and sleeping easy, sleeping well. All that other stuff that you're talking about, not for me. But I appreciate this time to talk about what I'm doing right now and why I'm happy. And I'm like, all right, fair enough. So noted. So you're right.
I want to, I think it was Lisa maybe who brought up the question, but I want to address one thing that's important too is how do you go about selecting people you sponsor so that it doesn't seem like favoritism? And this is where I want to channel something, Glenn, you said earlier, work on facts, work on data. I think even as we choose who we sponsor, even those of us who are quote unquote in this work and are very conscientious of our own awareness, we have to be careful because if we randomly said, okay, we're going to sponsor somebody, that is favoritism. But if you look at your organization and you say, hey, there is a gap, we are lacking this demographic group in this level. And you say, okay, let me identify somebody below this level that I can sponsor, then you're justified in how you choose that. Another way to look at that, and oftentimes I think people who look for sponsorship they're stuck, right? So looking at the length of time someone's been in a position, that's a metric that you really should look at, because I think somebody might have been Glenn again who attributed to this. Women get stuck at that 8-year level when they leave. So the length of time someone spends in a position without further opportunities, for those that want it, certainly there are those who are content, but for those who are looking, if they're spending too long and they're not getting the opportunity, or they've gone and applied repeatedly and they keep getting turned down, those are the people you ought to seek out and try to find some additional ways to support them, because then you're justified. You're not picking someone because they look like you or you happen to like them. You pick them because the business needs to make sure that they retain that wonderful talent, or that they fill that gap where there's a lack of demographic, that particular group in that. So I say work on data, and that ensures that, we don't let our own biases kick in too. Right?
I would like to reframe the question just a little bit. And particularly the reason why I want to do this is because I think sometimes when it's sponsorship, people of color or women, the first charge is favoritism. I think if you look at my company, I think if you look at most companies in San Diego and in this country, If you look at the leadership structures, they are mostly male. They are mostly white. This is true for my company as well. All of those people, and I can safely say this, all of those people had somebody sponsor them. You are not getting to be an SVP at my company without having somebody sponsor you. It's not going to happen. Somebody was in the room saying, Johnny is the perfect person to be an SVP at this company. So somebody sponsored them. What we're trying to do, and I think is what we were talking about earlier, we're trying to have equity. So we are trying to make sure that other people have that same opportunity to be sponsored. So I really want to make sure that we are careful with how we frame stuff, because a lot of times those are the arguments that I hear when people are talking about stuff like having targeted recruiting or having targeted development plans. The reason why we have to have those plans are not because we're favoring that group. We have to have those plans because that group has not been given the opportunity to be leaders within the organization.
Well, to that point, they had to implement the Rooney Rule in the NFL so they can bring in coaches of color at the very top, right? So, I mean, let's just call it what it is. Sometimes I think we dance around it like, I think we were talking about if I can we mention Wells Fargo? I don't know. Anyway, you guys heard that in the news. I mean, I didn't make this stuff up, right? You can't find talent, okay? Well, I'm a subscriber that talent is out there and it can be found. And that's why they implemented the Rooney Rule in the NFL for that very reason that you just pointed out, Glenn.
Yep. And on the Wells Fargo piece, I think that this goes back to why companies need plans and need to be intentional about the plan, because the Wells Fargo CEO's comments show a true lack of empathy and almost an awareness problem, let alone an ignorance problem. So.
No, and if you look, once again, I think that when we talk about people of color, sometimes we say you've got to have these certain skills. The reason why you're not at the top of your field in tech is because you don't have this degree or because you haven't done this. And I always point back to Steve Jobs had a design degree. Like, I mean, no offense, but like he wasn't even in tech, and he ran Apple. Jeff Bezos came from Wall Street to lead Amazon. Andrew Jassy, who oversees AWS, I think has an economics degree. So for certain people, it's completely okay for them not to have these certain checkbox skills. But then for other people, you need to have went to MIT, Georgia Tech for your PhD, and you need to have every single checkbox that we have here. And once we get past that point, once we get past the point where we made the CEO of Palo Alto Network, he was just a lawyer, and then we made him the CEO. Once we start to make people of color those roles, then I think we can start talking about whether or not we're showing favoritism to people. But that's just my opinion.
I'm looking for an emoji. I need an emoji on that.
Well, that's a whole nother Oprah show. The things that you need to do to reach the top as a person of color, is a whole nother Oprah show. But I'm a witness to that. I was sharing with someone earlier in the week. I've never been anyone's first choice at any job that I've competed for. Never. I never have folks calling me saying, what are you going to do next? Because we sure want you to come work for us. Always had to scratch and fight and compete real hard. But at the end of the day, I built a convention center. I left the city in good standing. And I'm here working in a great agency where we've turned things around. And it's not all about me. It's just about the fact that people of color, when they reach the top spot, they are battle tested. They are battle tested, they're tried and true, and they have all of the, prerequisites that they need to be in that position. And so, you know, what we're lacking are opportunities to be great. And so that in essence, if you don't hear anything from me tonight, create windows of opportunity for individuals that wouldn't ordinarily get them. You'd be greatly surprised.
So, sorry, a lot of voices, but I want to add one thing. If anyone's ever heard of anyone ever said, I never thought about you in that position, because that was a true statement to me as I was applying for a position, and all I could say was, because you've never had it. So to anyone who's ever felt that or have shared that, I just want you to take a moment to acknowledge that statement, because you didn't see it because it didn't exist before, but it doesn't mean, to Rudy's point, I can't do it, right? So yeah, I think that's just, it's amazing how often that's like, I didn't see you in that position. No kidding. But anyway, I'll stop.